False accusations from his pregnant girlfriend destroyed my brother's life. His parents turned on him, and we ran away to prove his innocence. I'm 14 now, and I've been wanting to share this story for a long time. It's a wild one, so bear with me. I know it might sound made up, but trust me, I wish it was. This whole thing wrecked my family, and I'm not even allowed to talk about it because my parents want to pretend it never happened. Just to be safe, I'm using my friend's brother's Reddit account. So, here's a little background. My dad separated from my older sister Lucy's mom when I was really young. Lucy's 25 now, and my mom lost her ex-husband in a car accident, which left her to raise my older brother. He's 23 now. Both of them ended up as single parents with kids to take care of, and one day they met at the beach. They hit it off, exchanged numbers, and 2 years later they got married. But let me stop rambling and get to the real story. Everything started when I was 8 years old. My siblings were much older. My brother was 17 and in his third year of high school, and my sister was 19, working at a grocery store nearby. When my parents and Lucy were off at work, I would stay home with Kirby, my brother. Now, I know it might sound odd, but some of my best memories are with Kirby. A lot of older brothers don't really vibe with their younger siblings, but Kirby and I were different. I loved him with all my heart, and I know he loved me just the same. He always looked out for me, played with me, helped me with school stuff, and even took the blame when I messed up. But then, one day, everything changed. After school, I waited outside for Kirby like I always did. Since our schools were close, he'd usually come and pick me up, but this time was different. He never showed up. I waited until around 4 p.m., and eventually Lucy came to get me. I asked her what happened to Kirby, but she dodged the question. She wouldn't say anything. When we got home, I was met with the sounds of things crashing and the terrifying screams of my parents. What I saw when we walked inside was a nightmare. Kirby was on the floor, and my dad was kicking him and throwing dishes at him while my mom screamed the most awful things at him. I was frozen in fear, clinging to Lucy, who took me upstairs and told me not to leave the room. I stayed there, crying and listening, not knowing what to do. I had never seen my family like that, and even now, I'm still scared of them, no matter how old I get. Then suddenly I heard sirens. I peeked out the window and saw 2 police cars pull up, and several officers got out. They rushed into the house, and a little while later, I heard more screaming, followed by someone shouting about an arrest. I watched as the police dragged my parents to the car. They shouted horrible insults at Kirby. They called him worthless and said he deserved to be punished, with my mom agreeing to every word. After they were taken away, I finally went downstairs, and honestly, it was terrifying. Lucy was on the floor, sobbing, holding Kirby in her arms. He was completely covered in blood and bruises. After that, everything was a blur. I only remember being in an ambulance, then at the hospital. It felt like a dream. But my sister disagrees. To her, it was a nightmare, the worst day of her life. About 3 days later, my parents were still in jail for assault and attempted murder, and Lucy had taken time off work to care for me. That's when I finally worked up the courage to ask her what really happened. Lucy, being the only one who treated me like an adult, told me the truth. Kirby had been accused of assault by a girl in his high school. She went to the principal's office, bruised and crying, claiming Kirby had hurt her. Both our parents and the girl's parents were called in, and even the police got involved. Kirby tried explaining to our parents that he didn't do it, but they didn't believe him. They immediately sided with the girl. The police said they would investigate and run some tests, so both Kirby and the girl were allowed to go home. Meanwhile, Kirby was now in the hospital, facing possible long-term physical damage because the beating had severely injured him. The next day, the police called Lucy to the station, and she had to take me along. What they told us was beyond terrifying. It turns out the girl, let's call her Karen, had made the whole thing up. Karen, if you're reading this, know that what you did destroyed our lives. You lied. Apparently, she and Kirby didn't get along at school. After another fight, she hurt herself and decided to frame Kirby, first by claiming he hit her. Then she escalated it, thinking it would get Kirby expelled. But she made a mistake. She bragged about it during a video call with her friends, laughing about the whole situation. What she didn't expect was that her friends would turn against her except for one. A girl who had actually been through something traumatic and wasn't believed until recently. This former friend of Karen went to the police and told them everything. She even had a recording of part of the call. Once the police confronted Karen, she cracked and confessed, afraid of being arrested. My sister was beyond angry. My sister was furious. She wanted to tear Karen apart right then and there, but the police calmed her down, telling her that Karen's parents would have to pay a fine for the false accusation and slander. Lucy thought that was a step in the right direction, but definitely not enough. When we got home, our parents were there. The moment Lucy saw them, she lost it. She started yelling, telling them everything that had happened at the police station. They just stood there, listening in shock, their faces falling with every word. By the time she finished, Mom was already in tears and Dad, he was just frozen. And then, he said the worst thing he possibly could. "Are you sure about this?" Man, that was the dumbest thing he could have said. Lucy didn't hold back. She launched into a speech about how awful they were for believing that girl without even waiting for proof. Dad tried to defend himself, saying, "But the girl's words seemed credible." My sister snapped right back, saying, "Without evidence, words are worthless. I understand that many real victims aren't believed when there's no proof, and that's a terrible thing. But this was different. Karen had lied and manipulated everyone for such a petty reason. I'll never understand how my parents could fall for her lies so easily. I hate them for it, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive them." The house felt empty after that. Kirby was the heart and soul of our home. He was kind, always bringing joy to everyone. Without him, the silence was unbearable. After some time, Kirby woke up in the hospital, but only to face the reality of his injuries. To give you an idea, his jaw was shattered, he lost 60% of the vision in one eye, both his arm and forearm were broken, and his ribs were so damaged that they nearly punctured his lung. His leg was injured so badly that he'll never walk properly again without help. On top of all that, Kirby was diagnosed with severe PTSD, depression, and anxiety. He was never the same after that. He lived in constant pain and had to take a ton of medication just to get through the day. For a long time, he didn't even speak. When the device holding his jaw in place was removed, nothing changed. He only spoke when someone asked him a direct question. He wouldn't even tell us when he was hungry. Sometimes he'd just break down crying out of nowhere, likely from the trauma. I wanted to hug him, to comfort him, but his injuries were so severe that even a simple hug could cause him more pain. My parents tried to visit him multiple times. Mom would beg, and Dad even tried to force us to take them, but Lucy wouldn't allow it. She knew Kirby wanted nothing to do with them after everything. She told them as much, but it still didn't stop them. One day, when Lucy had to work and couldn't visit Kirby, my parents saw it as their chance. They decided to visit him in secret, thinking it would somehow. In my parents' minds, it probably went something like this. "Let's go visit our son, say sorry, he'll forgive us, and everything will be fine again. One big happy family." But wow, were they wrong. As soon as they walked into Kirby's hospital room, he let out the loudest scream I've ever heard from him. It was blood-curdling. Doctors and nurses rushed in to calm him down, and Kirby yelled, "Get them out of here! They're murderers! They've come to kill me! Please, get them out!" Then he broke down crying and passed out from the stress. Of course, my parents were immediately kicked out and banned from seeing Kirby ever again. Only Lucy and I were allowed to visit him after that. My mom cried all night, while my dad just kept blaming Kirby, saying he was exaggerating the whole situation. After months of physical and emotional recovery, Kirby was finally released from the hospital. And shockingly, my parents had the nerve to ask him to come back home. His response: "I would never return to that house, even if it were the last place on earth. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a mother. I hope you both pay for what you did to me." Kirby moved in with his paternal grandparents, who hadn't known the full story until then. They immediately took legal steps to protect him from our parents. Kirby told Lucy and me that we were always welcome to visit him, and we did. Honestly, I spent more time at his grandparents' house than I did with our parents. But the final straw came at a family party when we found out my dad had been lying to everyone. He told our whole family that Kirby had dropped out of school, gotten involved in drugs, and left home, taking the money we'd saved for my college. That money wasn't even my parents to begin with. It was Kirby and Lucy who had worked to save up for my education. Kirby took on tons of odd jobs, and now he's working even harder to save more because, in his words, I deserve a better future. Lucy and I were furious. We told our family the real story, and they were shocked and angry at our parents. The only ones who stood by them were my paternal grandparents, saying that everyone makes mistakes, and that my parents were just ashamed of what they'd done. But no one else was having it. They abandoned my parents and went straight to Kirby to apologize. Funny thing is, Kirby called me the next day, confused, asking why people he hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly apologizing to him. He had no idea what was going on. About a year after the incident, Karen's parents showed up at our door, asking if Kirby was home. When we said no, they apologized for what happened and left. Later, I found out they were actually trying to offer him compensation, money meant for Karen's college and her car, as a way to make things right. My brother, being who he is, thanked them but said no. Kirby made it clear that he'll never forgive Karen. He told her parents that if she ever shows her face in front of him again, he'll tell her the hard truth straight to her face. Her parents accepted that and left. Right now, my brother is doing better, but he's far from healed. He still has nightmares about that day, which lead to anxiety attacks, and someone always has to be there to calm him down. I want to be that person, to help him and escape the toxic environment we call home. So, I thought about moving in with Kirby. First, I talked to my brother. He was hesitant at first but eventually agreed and spoke to his grandparents, who were on board too. Lucy thought it was a great idea when I told her, but when I brought it up to my parents, things took a different turn. My mom burst into tears, and my dad freaked out, saying that everyone had already abandoned them and now their youngest son was leaving too. I was beyond irritated and told him I had abandoned him that terrible afternoon when they turned on Kirby. I made it clear he would never get me back. My dad, a man who always said crying was for the weak, broke down sobbing like a baby. He said he'd already lost everything and didn't want to lose me too. I couldn't handle it, so I left the house and went to a friend's place to vent. My friend, surprisingly, scolded me, saying I shouldn't just abandon my parents like that. His older brother, Steve, the one whose Reddit account this is, didn't agree. Steve told him to shut up and said his brother had a weak mind. Then he introduced me to Reddit and suggested I get other people's opinions. So, here I am, asking for advice. Update 1. Hey guys. A lot has happened since I first posted. First off, I want to thank everyone for the support and all the helpful comments. I also want to thank Steve, the owner of this account, for backing me up. Let me tell you what's been going on. I had to run away from home. After I told my parents about wanting to leave, they straight up forbade me from going anywhere. So I waited for the right moment. They eventually decided to go shopping together. Something they never took me along for because they think I'm just a kid who'll beg for junk food. While they were busy complaining about how expensive everything was, I took the opportunity. I packed up the essentials, shoved them in my backpack, and threw in some snacks to cover it up. But then, unexpectedly, they forced me to come along on their shopping trip. I knew this was my chance, so when we got to the store, I told them I needed to use the bathroom. They were so wrapped up in arguing about food prices that my dad just waved me off and told me to hurry back. Plot twist. I didn't go back. I ran out of the market as fast as I could and caught the bus that went closest to Kirby's grandparents' house. When I arrived at Kirby's grandparents' house, his grandmother was the one who greeted me. She was kind and told me to relax while we waited for Kirby and his grandfather to come home. When they finally got back, I explained everything that had happened, including what I shared on Reddit. But Kirby's reaction wasn't what I expected. He scolded me for running away, saying it was reckless and dangerous, and that something bad could have happened to me. It might sound strange, but I actually liked that he scolded me. It showed that he cares, unlike our parents. I could go missing for 3 days, and they wouldn't even notice until they got mad at me when they finally realized. That's actually happened before. I accepted Kirby's scolding with a smile and then asked if I could stay with him. He looked at me and said, "Even if I sent you back, you'd just come right back here. So yeah, you can stay." I was so happy. I hugged him tight. His grandparents were glad about his decision too. But my joy didn't last long when Kirby told me I had to let our parents know where I was. I immediately protested, knowing they'd come for me, but he insisted, "They're still responsible for you. If you don't tell them, they could call the police and claim I kidnapped you or something." Reluctantly, I called my mom. She barely let me speak before she started screaming, demanding to know where I was. When I told her I was at Kirby's grandparents' house, she completely lost it, shouting loud enough for everyone around me to hear. I could have stayed on the line, listening to her freak out, but when I noticed how uncomfortable Kirby was getting, I hung up. After the attack, he became really sensitive to yelling. He muttered some angry words about our parents and what they'd done to him. I was angry too and told him they could try and take me by force if they wanted. Kirby, though, reassured me. "They're aggressive, but they're not idiots. I have a protective order against them. If they come near, we'll just call the police." Well, we were wrong. About an hour and a half later, they showed up at the house, banging on the front door and screaming all kinds of insults at Kirby. Stuff that was so vile I couldn't even repeat it. His grandparents calmly told them to leave or they'd call the cops. That only made them angrier. They kept pounding on the door, shouting louder. I wanted to go out there and tell them to get lost, but Kirby needed me. I had to hold him back because he was ready to charge out there and confront them. The anger he has toward them runs deep. He's told me before that he wishes he could make them pay, slowly and painfully. Honestly, I understand how he feels, but I don't think he should dirty his hands with them. Then, out of nowhere, they broke the door down. They stormed inside, tearing the place apart, screaming for me. At that point, I knew I had to go down and face them. I couldn't let this continue. I was getting ready to confront them when I worked to calm my brother down, assuring him I'd go downstairs and handle things so he could stay safe. Just then, I heard my mom scream louder than I'd ever heard before, and suddenly, my dad went completely silent. Once Kirby agreed to stay put, I went downstairs, and the sight was pathetic. My dad was slumped on the floor, shaking, while my mom was leaning over him, crying and calling his name. Then, I noticed Kirby's grandfather standing nearby, holding a taser. I think we all knew what had happened. As soon as my mom saw me, she started screaming, "Do you see what they did to your father? Call the police. They should be arrested." I calmly responded, telling her that if I called the police, she'd be the one arrested for violating the protective order. She ignored me, still screaming for an ambulance for my dad. We refused and said that once my father recovered, they needed to leave and never come back. When my dad finally came to, he was strangely quiet, completely defeated, like he'd given up. But before I could process that, Kirby came downstairs. The second my mom saw him, she immediately lashed out. That's when things escalated. What followed was a showdown between my furious brother and our hysterical mother. She started blaming him for everything, saying it was his fault that all our relatives had abandoned her and that her children had turned their backs on her. Then, she shifted into full victim mode, crying that she was just an innocent woman who went to church every Sunday and didn't deserve any of this. I don't know what she was expecting. That someone would pity her just because she went to church? Kirby stayed silent through most of her rant, but then she crossed a line. She demanded that he apologize to them for ruining their lives and tell the rest of the family he had forgiven them. That was it. Kirby snapped. He slapped her so hard she fell to the ground. She started screaming again, but Kirby wasn't having it. He told her to shut up or he'd break her teeth on the base of his cane. Then he let it all out. Years of pent-up anger and resentment came flooding out. He screamed at her, telling her how awful they were, how they dug their own graves, and how they didn't deserve anyone in their lives. He even said that when they died, he'd make a point to piss on their coffins. My mom, enraged, got back on her feet and tried to hit Kirby, but I stepped in, pushing her back against the wall. That's when she turned her rage on me, shouting that I'd go to hell for abandoning her and calling me all sorts of names, including disgusting, for being gay. For context, I'm bisexual and I made the mistake of telling my parents that a while back. Surprisingly, my dad was okay with it. But my mom? She lost it. She went on and on about how I was going to hell, even trying to forbid me from being bisexual, as if she had any control over that. It got worse when my mom started introducing me to her church friends' daughters, making it super awkward for everyone involved. It was disgusting and made the girls uncomfortable. The funny part? When I told Kirby about it, he just laughed and said, "So, when are you giving me a nephew? That's my brother for you. Cool with it, no matter what." Anyway, Kirby finally had enough and started kicking them out, telling them they better pay for the damage they caused to the house or we'd file a complaint. My mom just laughed, saying I'd never have the guts to report my own mother. But I told her I had plenty of courage and would absolutely enjoy seeing her arrested again. She tried making excuses, saying we didn't have proof. Kirby shut that down real fast, pointing out that not only did we have their fingerprints, but the house had cameras, and he had video evidence of everything. It took a while, but eventually, she realized she was beat, and they finally left. But Kirby had one last thing to say before she got into the car. He yelled, "I wish you died instead of Dad." My mom responded by flipping him off, screaming as she got into the car. Kirby just laughed. The kind of laugh you let out after a long, hard-won victory. It was that laugh. Not long after, our sister called. Apparently, our mom had phoned her, claiming Kirby attacked her and demanding she bring me back home. But Lucy was proud of me for standing up to them and joked that Kirby should have broken the cane over their heads. Now I'm living with my brother, like I always wanted, and honestly, it's been amazing. Kirby's determined to get custody of me, and he's threatening our parents to make sure it happens, one way or another. My mom, of course, is saying she won't leave me with an abuser, which is ridiculous. She actually thinks the fact that I'm bisexual means Kirby abused me. How crazy is that? For now, it's just a waiting game to see if she gives in. I think things will work out, though. Just the other night, I had a conversation with Kirby before he went to bed. He wondered what life would be like if his dad were still alive. I told him maybe things would have been better for him. But Kirby just smiled and said, "Maybe not. If he hadn't died, maybe I wouldn't have gone through all the pain, but I also wouldn't have my two angels in my life." Then he kissed me on the forehead. It was so sweet. I hugged him tight, knowing that no matter what, we'll always have each other's backs. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting me. I really hope no one has to go through what we did. And for anyone who thinks this story is made up, trust me, I wish it was. I wish we could have been a loving, supportive family, but that only happens in my dreams. See you around, maybe with another update once the legal stuff is sorted out. Update 2. Hey guys, thanks so much for all your support. I'm doing fine and Kirby's doing better. Not completely okay, but we're getting there. Kirby's still pushing hard to get custody of me, and he's throwing everything he has at our parents. But I wouldn't be here just to say we're fine. Let me tell you what happened next. We were having a quiet afternoon when there was a knock at the door. The same door Kirby's grandfather's friend had just repaired. I answered the door, and to my surprise, it was my dad standing there. I immediately told him to leave, but he said he just wanted to talk and wasn't here to make a scene. I told him to get lost and that the only talking we'd be doing was in court. He kept insisting, and Kirby's grandparents threatened to call the police. Then, to everyone's shock, Kirby told them to let him in. We were all confused and asked him why. Kirby just shrugged and said, "He's a stubborn idiot. He won't leave unless we let him in. Better to get it over with." So we let him in, but we were ready if things got out of hand. Kirby sat at the kitchen table, and the rest of us stayed in the kitchen for safety. Kirby's grandmother was recording the whole thing as extra proof that my dad had violated the protective order. The conversation went like this: "Kirby, very brave of you to show your face here after everything you've done."
"Dad, I'm sorry."
"I swear I'll pay for all the damage." Kirby, "Oh, you'll pay?" "Yeah, sure, because everything can be fixed with money, right? I'm not talking about the material stuff, that's replaceable. What you did to me, though, that can't be fixed." "Dad, I know, I'm sorry. I'd give anything to go back in time. I'd do everything differently. Kirby? But you can't go back, can you? The damage is done. You destroyed me. You destroyed our family. Dad, it was a mistake. If you'd told us the truth from the start, maybe things would have been different. Kirby, I did tell you. You just didn't want to listen. Do you even understand what you put me through? You made me feel like I didn't deserve to live. You made me want to die. Do you have any idea what it's like to feel that way? No, of course you don't. You're the one who attacked me. You'll never know the fear your victim felt. You piece of... At that point, Kirby broke down. But this wasn't just sadness. It was years of pent-up anger and pain spilling out. He was crying, but it was a cry full of rage and resentment. My dad kept trying to apologize, but Kirby wasn't having it. Kirby cut him off, saying, "You're not apologizing because you're truly sorry for what you did. You're doing it to make yourself feel better, to ease your guilt." Dad kept apologizing over and over, but it was clear it wasn't going anywhere. Kirby, fighting off an anxiety attack, threw down an ultimatum. "Kirby, you want forgiveness? Here's the deal. You're going to give me full custody of my brother. You're going to pay child support, and you're never going to come near me, him, or anyone in this family ever again. If you don't, I swear I'll make your life a living hell. Ricard." I'm using a fake name for privacy. Without hesitation, my dad agreed. I'll be honest, I don't feel the least bit sorry for him. But I've never seen him look so defeated in my life. In that moment, I think the weight of everything he'd done finally hit him, hard. I don't feel sorry for him at all. He deserves every bit of this, deserves to feel the misery he caused our family. After everything, he left, saying he'd try to convince my mom to give up custody. Before he walked out the door, he asked me for forgiveness, but I just ignored him. The second he stepped outside, my brother completely broke down. It was like all his courage drained away. He collapsed to his knees, crying, hyperventilating, and sweating like crazy. His body went cold, and we rushed him to his room so he could lie down. We gave him his anxiety medication, but nothing seemed to help. Panicking, I called Lucy and told her what happened. She came over right away, and we all stayed in the room trying to calm him down. Lucy kept telling Kirby how brave he was, that even though he was scared, he stayed in the same room with our father, his abuser and the man who nearly killed him. She reminded him how strong he was, but it took hours for Kirby to finally settle down and fall asleep. Just in case, Lucy and I slept in the same room with him, knowing he might have nightmares after that whole ordeal. But of course, it didn't end there. A few hours later, my mom called, furious. She was ranting about Kirby, calling him all sorts of names and saying that he had bewitched her sweet husband, and that Dad now wanted to give everything to him. Lucy told her to shove it, adding that at least Dad had finally come to his senses. I really hope my mom eventually wakes up and does the right thing, but I'm not holding my breath. Thanks again for everyone's support, and a big shout out to Steve, the owner of this account, for always having my back since I first shared my story. I'll keep you all posted if anything new happens. See you later. Oh, and for anyone wondering why I use fake names, it's to protect my brother's privacy. Update 3. Hey guys, it's been a while. You all deserve the latest update, and I'm happy to say it's finally over. I'm free from that house and those people. Let me fill you in on what happened. My mom refused to give up custody no matter what. My dad tried every trick in the book to pressure her, but she wouldn't budge. She kept saying she would never give up on me and that she'd do anything to get me back. So, since she wasn't giving in, we decided to turn up the heat. We told everyone in our family the whole story, explaining how my brother wanted custody of me and everything connected to it. The family was on our side and started going after my mom directly, telling her that letting my brother have custody was the least she and my dad could do after everything they'd put us through. But my mom blocked them all, claiming my brother had somehow cursed them. Typical. In her mind, everything is witchcraft when things don't go her way. My mom proved to be completely unhinged. A week after I moved in with Kirby, she called me in that classic Karen tone, saying, "I'll give you 2 options. You come home without complaining, and we'll pretend none of this ever happened, or you come back, and you'll suffer the consequences." I didn't back down. I told her that my brother had a name, not some insult she came up with, and that he wouldn't step foot in that house, not even dead. She hung up on me after that, and honestly, I was worried she might try something. I called Kirby to let him know, but he told me not to stress. If anything happened, he'd find out. Well, it didn't take long. A few hours later, the police showed up, but at our neighbor's house, not ours. The neighbor, an elderly woman who's always been very kind to us, was confused. Apparently, the police had been called because of a report of child abuse. I immediately pieced it together. My mom had called the police, but in her state of craziness, she'd gotten the address wrong and sent them to the wrong house. A few hours later, my mom called again, smugly saying she could withdraw the complaint if I just came home without any fuss. I told her exactly where she could go and hung up. Kirby apologized to the neighbor for the confusion, and that's when he decided we needed to play dirty. 2. We used our last weapon, our maternal grandmother. Now, she's the only person my mother hates more than my brother. It was tough to track her down because, sadly, our grandma isn't too fond of Lucy and me either, simply because we're our father's kids. But she adores Kirby. He's her favorite, which gave us a huge advantage. After hunting down her contact info, Kirby called her and told her everything, from the assault to our current situation. His only question was if she could help us. Her response? "I'll be there as soon as I can." And believe me, an hour and a half later, she showed up in our city. Kirby only asked her to call our mom, and she agreed without hesitation. Then, without wasting any time, she went straight to our parents' house for a surprise visit, the kind my mom hates. Not long after, Lucy and I started getting frantic calls from our mom, asking if Kirby had anything to do with Grandma's visit. We just ignored her, but honestly, it was kind of fun imagining the chaos our grandmother was causing. Here's the thing. My mom and dad can't really fight back when it comes to Grandma because my mom is greedy and our grandmother owns a lot of valuable land. If she ever sold it, it could easily support someone for a long time. So, in addition to being difficult people, my parents are also idiots, trapped in this awkward situation where they have to play nice. My parents are absolute psychopaths and greedy to the core. Honestly, I think Kirby was born into the wrong family because it's impossible to believe we're related. After 2 weeks of my grandmother torturing them, my mom finally snapped and asked when she'd leave. Grandma just smiled and said she'd only leave when my mom gave up custody of me. Of course, my mom refused and tried to kick her out. That's when Grandma played her trump card. Either my mom gave up custody, or she'd be written out of the will. So it came down to a choice, me or the money. Guess which one she picked? We went to court, and let me tell you, if looks could kill, my parents would have been 6 feet under. The judge went over all the details of what had happened and was visibly irritated, even wondering out loud how my parents had managed to avoid justice for so long. In my opinion, it's because in this world, money talks no matter what someone's done. My dad looked like he'd been punched in the face, but my mom? She sat there with this smug confidence, like she hadn't done anything wrong. The most intense moment, though, was when Kirby and my mom locked eyes in the courtroom. I swear, if you'd been there to see the way they looked at each other, you would have felt the tension. It was scary. Sometimes I forget they used to live under the same roof. My mom is the type who can pretend to be your friend, act normal, but deep down, she's manipulative and fake. If you don't agree with her, you're immediately seen as a threat and get criticized for it. Kirby, on the other hand, has an open mind that's almost intimidating. He can get along with anyone, no matter their background. If you ever see a guy using a cane who smiles and waves at you, there's a good chance that's my brother. So, answer me this. How on earth did these two completely opposite people come from the same family? I still can't wrap my head around it. Back to the court case. Things were complicated but moved surprisingly quickly. In the end, my parents didn't put up much of a fight. Our lawyer drafted an agreement that I'd stay with Kirby, and my parents would have to pay a very generous amount of child support. My mom, of course, protested, asking why they should pay anything now that I'm my brother's responsibility. Both my dad and Grandma immediately shut her down and made her agree to the terms. After all that stress and anxiety, we finally got what we wanted. I can now live with my brother, and my parents have no control over me anymore. Exactly 30 minutes after we left the courtroom, I deleted my parents' contact information from my phone. I don't need it anymore. They're now just a part of the past, a part I'm eager to forget. But wait, there's more. Before Grandma left, she dropped a bombshell. Apparently, my mom has never been in her will. Grandma took her out right after she married my dad. It was hilarious. My mom traded everything she could have had for something she'll never get. The only person in Grandma's will is Kirby. And honestly, he deserves every bit of it. I don't know if you'd call it karma or divine justice, but my brother got everything he deserved, and we couldn't be happier for him. To everyone here on Reddit, and especially to Steve, the owner of this account, thank you. You've helped me through one of the hardest chapters of my life, and now I can finally say it's over with a happy ending. I hope I won't have to come back here unless it's to share more good news in the future.